Welcome to the CRC Review Podcast. I thank everyone who experienced either the reviews or podcasts on the CRC Review. In this edition, I will discuss police reform, social violence, and standardized testing. There are legitimate calls for reform in how law enforcement agencies police our communities. There is reasonable change needed to restore trust within impacted communities. Majority of people can agree that police officers should be held to a higher standard of conduct than the average citizen because of the role in society. At the same time, one must understand the difficulties and challenges police officers face in their daily service, ranging from routine interactions to possible fatal engagements. Majority of arrests or police interactions around the nation are incident-free. Others involve incidents with harm to either the officer or the suspected criminal. One of the challenges society is attempting to solve is the occurrence of excessive or fatal force used against suspects who appear to be in controlled situations. The rational approach to this problem involves both improving use of force standards and reducing barriers to charging bad actors that blatantly violate the law. By no means should police officers be willing victims to criminal intentions of people seeking to avoid arrests with the use of violence. At the same time, police officers need to be able to show restraint in situations to avoid executing suspects without a real or present danger. Our Constitution entitles Americans to due process, adjudication by a judge and jury, and the presumption of innocence. Principles denied when suspect is killed during arrests, especially when unarmed. Cases where police mistaken a phone for a gun is quite troubling. Should the officers empty out the cartridges in these situations? We can agree this should not happen. There is reasonable need to improve the level of training for de-escalation techniques during the academy rather than waiting for an incident to happen. In the case of George Floyd, there was a clear lack of humanity in the arrest, where a police officer knelt on the neck of a handcuffed suspect even against warnings from his fellow officers. Like all profession, there are bad actors that need to be removed or even prosecuted for their behaviors. Law enforcement needs to follow suit for their bad actors. Some municipalities have processes in place, but those can be a rubber stamp for police brutality if the union enjoys overt influence. This may be the opportunity for meaningful reform. Any type of change requires strong leadership, which is lacking in many of the local leaders in the impacted states and local communities. Many of them pass responsibility to other levels of government for actions taken by people under their purview. Some of them accepted the irrational response to this situation by seeking to eliminate or weaken police forces, who overwhelmingly serve communities without major incidents. In fact, the ability to achieve useful and sustainable reforms will require increased investments into the law enforcement realm, funding, training, and review boards. The radical movement to defund police departments is proving to be a toxic policy approach, leading many prominent national candidates to back off their initial support. Some of these local leaders backed off their initial support once the angry and violent mob appeared to close for comfort, experiencing the threat posed by rioters directly. The reality is people do want communities with effective police departments. At the same time, people want equal application of the law. A victim of a crime, especially a violent crime, probably prefers the police over an underpaid, overworked social worker with a whistle to respond to their call. Local leaders need to show better leadership than deferring responsibility to other levels of government for behaviors of people under their purview. The path forward needs to be stronger focus on how society trains and selects our police officers, improve accountability protocols to remove bad performers, and prosecution for actions deemed blatantly criminal. Agencies recruiting better educated candidates show lower rates of incidents and brutality than departments that lowered standards to expand the sizes of their forces. Educated candidates can handle tense situations more effectively. While there is great hysteria out there, the rational set of people seeking reform simply want there to be transparency and justice when people entrusted to protect our communities criminally injure or take a life. Understandably, police officers face great dangers and at times must use force. They deal with a wide range of suspects, from the average person making a mistake to people who repeat violent offenders. The decision to use force must be justifiable. One can expect our law enforcers to show more restraint and judgment than the person they arrest. This not unreasonable. States might want to consider establishing more transparency in how cases involving force are evaluated. The facts can help reduce the level of hysteria surrounding these cases, as the gap of information is exploited. Society must protect residents from the violent offenders. As communities grow, More police are needed, not less. As criminals become more sophisticated and dangerous, our law enforcers must have the equipment needed. In our current environment, the roles of our police officers steadily increase with the need to enforce mask requirements, social distancing, and in NY, determining quarantine requirements for out-of-state travelers. Communities should not defund their police departments but implement rational reform that can ensure equal and fair treatment, while being able to fairly remove bad actors if their actions are criminal. Most police officers do the job the right way. Majority of police officers heroically help their communities day in and day out in a thankless job. Police are our heroes. Our heroes deserve respect and the ability to work in an environment where those in the profession that cannot live up to their standard are removed. The violence and social unrest taking place in places like Portland, Oregon and Kenosha, Wisconsin is no longer remaining in the shadows of society. No longer can be overlooked or discarded as a right-wing conspiracy theory. For some time, Democrats appeared to believe the riots, looting, and violence against police officers, innocent bystanders, and peaceful protesters provided a political edge. Many in the media and national and local Democrats provided cover for these actions, believing it provided cover to advance their overall agenda by embracing the anger. On the other hand, President Trump focused greatly on the violence, making some feel he did not speak enough about the underlying issues the peaceful protesters, not involved in the violence, raised. The situation continued to a point where polling changed. Now, the violence and the political responsibility is a national issue impacting the presidential race. New criticism prodded Joe Biden to leave the comforts of his basement and provide account of the narrative that his campaign supports the unrest and radical ideas like defunding the police. Democrats galvanized around the idea that this could be blamed on the President Trump, blaming him on taking a strong stance on law and order and fueling the anger demonstrated by this violence. President Trump does a strong stance on law and order and supporting the police officers who do the job the right way. He could do more to push for bring justice to ones who do the job the wrong way. His administration and campaign acknowledge the shared values that equal protection under the law is essential to our society. That officers committing crimes should be punished. They could speak more on it. In an election year, politicians believe words can cover for actions taken. The actions by local Democratic leaders to allow perpetrators of violence to remain free. Campaign staff bailing out offenders to continue their crimes. There was clear lack of leadership in these Democratic-controlled areas that allowed and excused rioting, looting, and violence at the expense of local communities and legitimate peaceful protesters. Many of these so-called leaders allowed segments of their communities to be destroyed while denying critical assistance and even permitting angry mobs to capture parts of their cities. The bail funds provided by the Biden campaign allowed many to return to their destruction. Unfortunately, Biden prefers that American taxpayers foot the bill for the cleanup and restoration of these areas. A blind eye was turned to the violence until it showed up at the front doors of the homes of these leaders or impacted polls critical for extending political careers. At a time when society is asking so much more from our law enforcement, including supporting COVID responses and now protecting innocent bystanders, local Dems seek to cut funds and hours of police departments. Police officers committing crime should be held accountable like every other criminal. The solutions to improving the situation is not removing funds that can help improve training and accountability for these departments. The violence and chaos are clearly a direct result of poor leadership by elected officials in Democratic-controlled cities. They allowed violence to mute voices of the actual peaceful protesters who seek change. Standardized testing is essential in both measuring the quality of instruction provided by educational institutions and identify the individual needs of students, who do not all learn at the same rates. Not all schools operate under the same model, so educational quality is far from standard. Some schools provide education quality that exceeds global standards, while others graduate students who are borderline incompetent. The only way to improve quality is to measure and track performance to institute meaningful reforms that increase successful outcomes for the students, who are the end users of the system. The push against standardized testing largely comes from teachers' unions that seek to protect members from loss of employment related to students' ability to perform adequately on the tests. A common argument made is that teachers prefer to teach their respective subject matters rather than take instruction time to ensure students excel on the test. Essentially, they teach the test. Leadership of some school districts encroach on teachers by making it a school-wide effort to improve results. Making every class teach the test, whether it is a related subject or not. A common sense retort is that if the teachers adequately taught the subject matters, the students would be able to perform well on the test, making the encroachments not needed. There are variances in performance in standardized testing that shows that certain demographic groups consistently perform better on standardized testing than their peers. Students from wealthier areas and backgrounds perform better on state testing as well as college entrance exams than students from more humble areas, especially underrepresented minorities. Therefore, some institutions are turning away from standardized testing, labeling the practice as systemic racism. Because the variance in performance is seen across racial lines rather than the practice itself, if the pool of questions differed from each group, then there would be an argument for discrimination. The argument is some groups have access to preparation material and others may not. A more effective substitute has not been identified. Seems like some of these institutions are willing to see the performance gap occur in the collegiate classrooms. Identifying which students may need additional instruction is important. Completely eliminating standardized testing may not serve the best interests of the student or the institution. A more effective approach in seeking diversity in recruitment may be reducing the significance of standard testing in the admission process rather than eliminating it. Students' knowledge can go well beyond what can be learned in a textbook, laboratory, or classroom instruction. There are applicants with real-life work experience that can help shape the accepted class. Variances in standardized testing are largely the result of the quality of education received in their home community, which can lead to long-term problems for residents. The solution is not to hide the problems, but to use data to implement real reforms to ensure every student can compete to enter the college of their dreams or pursue the career path of their choosing. I want to thank you for taking the time to experience the CRC Review podcast.